was interesting to say the least, but worth it.
Good for you.
It was worth it. I got
business that's at $1 million in revenue, growing 300% year over year.
Welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm Tammy Dorr.
Welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm Ben Data, co-chair of DSW. This year marks the 10-year anniversary of Denver Startup Week. This community has been the catalyst for lots of change over the past decade, and this week we're coming together to celebrate the past and dream big for the future. We are able to bring Denver Startup Week to this community thanks to our 2021 sponsors. Thank you to our HQ and title sponsor, Amazon, and our title sponsors, whose leadership makes this week come to life. Capital One Cafe, Downtown Denver Partnership, Fluid Truck, Hotel Engine, and WeWork. And our track sponsors, who have made all of the great content you're hearing today possible. Founder Track, Kickstart, Growth Track, Friday Health Plans, Developer Track, Quizlet, Product Track, Palantir, Designer Track, Battery 621 in the Public Works, People Track, Exactly, and Spotlight event sponsor, Strat Labs. Our headline event sponsors are bringing the excitement this week. Thank you to B-Side Fun, Colorado Public Radio, Comcast, Coors Brewing Company, Denver Pavilions, Entrepreneurship at the University of Denver, Gusto, JP Morgan Chase, Method, Moss Adams, Pine Insurance, Promontory Mortgage Path, Red Bull Basement, Southwest, Tattered Cover, and VF Venture Foundry. Finally, thank you to our partner and member sponsors listed on the screen. Please say thank you to these companies as you enjoy our hybrid Denver Startup Week. And don't forget to use hashtag #DenStartupWeek to share your experience and moments of inspiration on social media. Have a great week.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our Build Back Better panel here, first day of Denver Startup Week and the 10th anniversary. I am Zanetta Kelsey. I am the founder of Delightsome, a marketing and customer experience agency, and I'm also working within our Colorado ecosystem to build more inclusivity. And this panel that we've designed for you today is to tell stories of resilience and brilliance from our BIPOC tech founders and those who are associated with the Colorado tech ecosystem. And so I'm very pleased to welcome my esteemed colleagues here. And before I make some introductions, I'd like to ask if there are any questions that you have or any comments that you'd like to make. Please use the Q&A feature here in Zoom if you'd like for us to get to those questions, and we'll be sure to save a little bit of time on the back end of our session here together. All right, so let's hop right into this. We're talking about the way that our BIPOC tech founders in Colorado have weathered through a whole pandemic, a pandemic that happens once in a century. They've started they've started companies, and they've made it through. So what I'm going to do is turn over the mic to Maurice Dukes. Maurice, would you give us an introduction of yourself and your company, please?
Yes, I'm Maurice Dukes. I am the co-founder and CEO of Petrofunders. We are a fintech-powered investment platform that's geared towards opening up income to the oil and gas community and oil and gas sector in ways that have not been done before. So that's what we primarily look to do, and glad to be here this week.
Thrilled to have you, Maurice. Thank you for joining us. All right, Sharice Hawkins, introduce yourself, please.
Hello, I'm Sharice Hawkins. I'm the CEO and founder of PageTip. I'm also a corporate escapee, having worked as an engineer for some very large organizations before coming to my senses and becoming an entrepreneur. PageTip is a no-code cloud-based authoring environment for creating rapidly creating interactive, engaging, and measurable documentation.
Excellent. And Sharice, your company won the Bringing Diving to Colorado Denver Startup Week pre-pitch, and you'll be pitching this week. So excited for you. All right, thank you so much. All right, let's move along to Kanita Snow.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kanita Hang Snow. I am a strategic storytelling consultant based out of Denver. My business was born during the pandemic. I actually got laid off, and I started this business, and it's been a silver lining for sure. I'm also the creative director and co-founder of the Colorado University's Innovation Council, which is a nonprofit that was also born during the pandemic that seeks to bring together the power of what universities can do by working together with the state and with industry.
Excellent. And Kanita, thank you for all your hard work and your efforts here within the Colorado tech ecosystem. Appreciate you. All right, Joe Thurman, you're up.
Thanks. Yeah. So Joe Thurman, co-founder and CEO of Interview IA. We are an HR tech platform based here in Denver, focused on bringing ethical and equitable interviewing to the core of every business. Been in talent for about 15 years. Love helping to build back literally and figuratively better. So yeah, excited to be a part of this panel.
Thank you so much. And we really love your background today. Thank you. It's wonderful. All right. Arazu Zarafshan, we are so excited to have you. We've known each other for quite a while here in the Colorado ecosystem. Would you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your company?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Arazu Zarafshan, and I am the founder and CEO of a company called Call Emmy. Call Emmy is a digital marketplace that connects busy parents and professionals to local, vetted, and qualified service providers in an on-demand fashion. And my company also was launched during the pandemic.
Yeah, great. So let's start with you, and we'll pass the mic around for this first question. And we want to talk about, we said that there's been a pandemic, and that's no secret. Everybody knows that. And it's been quite difficult for a lot of people. And how difficult, we want to talk about some of those difficulties that we faced here in Colorado, especially within the tech ecosystem. But pre-pandemic, if we can think back, can we even go back to that moment, those days pre-pandemic, when you were starting your business, you were thinking about what you could do, what you could bring to the marketplace? What were some of your dreams about what you could do, and what were you most looking forward to as you were building and thinking about this pre-pandemic?
So, for me, pre-pandemic, I was, just like Sharice, I'm also a corporate escapee, more like corporate eject, Pre-pandemic, I would say that I was a little bit gun shy. I was, I had one foot here, one foot there. Maybe I'll do this, maybe I won't do this. And, what I would say is that, looking back at the opportunity that was right there in front of me. Oops, sorry about that.
That's okay. It was very faint. You're fine.
Apologies. My husband is calling, so I will call him back as soon as I finish saying what I was gonna say. Okay, can we? Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. This is our lives as
Yes, this is the life
working moms.
Absolutely.
As working moms.
Absolutely, it's okay.
Let me just put myself on do not disturb. So, there was all this opportunity right in front of me to launch this thing, to network, to meet new people. Never had any thought about, maybe we won't be able to go inside people's homes, because that wasn't an issue. And I wish, now that I look back 18 months later, I wish that I had committed myself more forcefully to my new venture. And I wish I'd made more progress, pre-pandemic. That's what I would say to myself looking back is, go for it and go now and go do it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So Charisse, you too, me too, a corporate escapee, a corporate exeter. Tell us a little bit about what you were thinking pre-pandemic, because you said you had started your business quite a while ago before some of these other co-founders here.
Yes, during the few months leading up to the pandemic, we had identified our lead investor and had begun a very serious equity round of a preferred equity round. So I was pitching and raising that round. So the pandemic came as a huge shock to that process. And as we know, things slowed down and changed. And so we had to be very nimble in terms of how we handled being about halfway through a financial raise in the midst of all this chaos.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So Joe, over to you. What do you think what were you thinking pre-pandemic? What were you most looking forward to right before the pandemic happened?
So we were at an interesting point. I had been running my previous company prior to Interview IA for about 6 years. So my previous company was called Jobber Group. We were a talent strategy firm here in Denver. Pre-pandemic, I was an entrepreneur. I wanted to build my own way. I wanted to build a team. We had an office in downtown Denver. I had started the process of spinning off the technology side of the organization, which is now Interview IA. And so I will say that we had some planning in place, but it was a very, very tough time going into the pandemic. We lost a lot of our service business, which was part of the thing that was feeding and funding the initial launch of what is now Interview IA. And so I will say, you go from during the pandemic, I had said that strategic thinking was at best a week out, and that's what we saw every company go through. And so I will say probably the most challenging time as a founder. I don't know if I'm answering your question directly about pre-pandemic, but pre-pandemic, I had a vision and a dream of building a team here in Denver, building a company that really focused on impacting hiring. And I think, being an entrepreneur in a startup is all about not giving up. We didn't plan on having to not give up through a pandemic, but we didn't know what exactly it was going to throw at us. But I think that it tested and tried us all. And I think I feel fortunate to have come out the other end of it. But it was definitely a nerve-wracking time going into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Maurice, do any of these things resonate with you as a founder? Things that, we're hearing from the rest of the panelists as you were building your company, what changed and what were you looking forward to?
Mine was similar and different at the same time. I would say that being in the oil and gas industry, I also was a corporate person prior to co-founding PetroFunders, but it was a bit more opportunity driven for us, where it came from us seeing the commodity price of oil and gas, particularly WTI oil, in the month of April of 2020, which is right around the pandemic heating up really at record heights. especially the uncertainty associated with it. Crude oil, the front month of pricing went negative. And that was a big moment within our industry. And that was a big moment with, the next month I left that job and went to start Petrol Funders full time with my co-founder. And that was a big jumping point for us because we said, hey, this is going to be a really good time to launch a platform where retail investors and outside investment can get into this industry in a really centered and more direct way. So it was a timing thing for us, and we feel like we hit it with perfect timing. And now fast forward to today, we've launched and we have products and we're open for business, and it turned out to be a really good decision.
All right. So Kenita, it sounds like we're hearing from these other panelists that it was all about timing, and everyone had big visions and things that they were looking forward to. And a lot of that was uprooted, and now it's settling back down. Do you get that sense from the ecosystem that you engage, the folks in the ecosystem you engage, and for you personally?
Yeah, definitely. Before I was running the Entrepreneurship Hub at the University of Denver with a colleague of mine. And that's something I had always loved doing. And there was a lot of momentum that I carried forward as I launched my own business. And something that I've always been passionate about is supporting BIPOC-owned businesses and women-owned businesses. So there's been beautiful energy around supporting these businesses. And for me, that has been a silver lining for sure. Sorry, Zanetta, am I answering your question?
You are. No, you are. Go for it.
And yeah, this pandemic has just been full of, I think, a lot of growth, a lot of momentum, a lot of energy, and organizations have really blossomed over the past year and a half.
Yeah, you're talking about a lot of pivots that people had to make, a lot of new things that were introduced, a lot of change. So what would you say, panelists, what changed permanently and has not gone back to pre-pandemic times that you'd like to see go back to pre-pandemic times for you? We were able to engage in person and some of those things, but what is something that changed permanently and hasn't gone back yet? And Kenita, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, let's see, what has changed permanently? I think I've just gotten involved with a lot of organizations and said yes to a lot of things. And that has been amazing. And I think my networks have just been so supportive during this whole time. For my consulting business, all of my business has been from word of mouth. And I think that it has just been incredible. So I'm so thankful to my community for showing up and supporting me. I'm looking forward to connecting with people in person. Like, that's something that hasn't changed. I crave being together. I crave like sitting across from you, Zanetta, when we have those opportunities to sit together outside. I just gain so much energy from that.
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to.
Absolutely. And you have built community in ways that you wouldn't have anticipated with Energize Colorado, and also some of the other things that you run a board for a nonprofit. And I don't know if that was that pre-pandemic, or did that come out of after the pandemic?
So I was involved with an organization that's a social impact organization called the Village Institute in Aurora, Colorado, that supports single women, families, and refugees. And it's a live, learn, work center. I was involved with them pre-pandemic, but I took on the role of board chair during the pandemic. And it's just been a really hard time. They have a childcare business on site, and it's been an incredibly difficult time for childcare providers. And there were a lot of reasons why I wanted to get more involved, why I wanted to see them succeed. So yeah, it's been saying yes and showing up and seeing, how can I support others in the community that has been personally really fulfilling for me.
Yeah, that's great. So, Kenita, what you're saying is you've opened up, your network opened up, and is more supportive of you, is a thing that changed for you permanently that you've enjoyed. Panelists, what else would you say changed permanently that hasn't quite gone back yet?
I think that our success in moving to remote work as a team was seamless. We are just as effective as a remote team as we were in person. And there's some conveniences. One of our employees had the opportunity and needed to move closer to family in a different time zone, and that was an effortless transition. And so it's definitely improved the flexibility for some of our employees, and also our capacity. Just simply being across multiple time zones means that we have more capacity to support our customers in different time zones. And one thing that hasn't gone back, and I hope it doesn't, I remember right before the pandemic, we went out to a customer in Atlanta, and we had a meeting scheduled, and it was a 1-hour meeting. And I think about all the time and effort and logistics of flying that far. It was a very important customer, mind you, but now we understand that business can be done in ways that are not just so arduous for those that are traveling, for, perhaps fly. I would call it more of a needless trip in the sense of how many hours were spent on the road versus the amount of time that we spent face to face with that customer. So I think being more mindful about when that's appropriate. It's not going to go away completely. I don't think it should, but when does it make sense to do a Zoom and then collaborate in person at different stages in the project?
That's interesting, Cherise. So what you're saying is remote working as well as client visits or client demonstrations have changed. And that's a really interesting point to make. I think that impacts the travel industry, but for tech founders, I think that's quite an interesting point. I'm wondering, is it easier, do you feel like, and this is not just for you, but for anyone, do you feel like it's easier for tech-enabled, tech-based companies to make that transition to fully remote work because that's the nature of the way that you're engaging?
I'll chime in. I know that was kind of just thrown out there to all of us, but yeah, I do think that tech-enabled or tech-focused companies definitely have an advantage for that. I mean, we saw that throughout the pandemic. People within different industries that really do require people to be in person, they struggle. Even still, we're seeing, the hospitality industry is still struggling a lot with just trying to rebuild coming out of this. So being able to find new ways, have a lot of options to how we can keep a team engaged, keep employees moving forward, and keep building companies. I definitely think that tech-enabled organizations had a huge advantage there. Innovations coming out of it for all industries, but some have a longer tail for solving that problem than I think tech companies do at this point.
Yeah, that's
something that I think is positive, is how we can nurture a different type of work-life integration and balance, and the things that we can lean into, and everything from the mental health conversation changes when you actually start to think of companies that can sustain work from home. And then we have to obviously have a different conversation for companies that can't be remote first, and how can they lean in to support the needs of their employees. But I would agree with you, Zanita.
Yeah. So that's important, that the work-life balance piece. And, we've heard a lot about how this pandemic has enabled tech companies to grow and has enabled the remote workforce to come into place. I'm curious then, that work-life balance piece, because we know if you're working from home, do you find for yourself, do you find for your co-founders or people that you're working with in your startups that you are overworking, or is that such a thing when you're starting up?
I guess I can jump in on this one. At times, yes, overwork or diving into work just because it's so convenient. It's kind of hard to turn things off when, like this, it is your house, it is your home, it is your room. right? I think for us, the challenge that a lot of people, both us and people on this call, will be faced with is how to tailor your culture as you grow in a remote way, right? So we launched within the pandemic setting, and we find it, somewhat challenging to onboard, especially new hires that are fresh out of college, right? How do you establish a culture? How do you establish a cadence? And I think that's something that, although, I can piggyback off what Joe mentioned of us having been tech enabled, giving you the leg up and advantage to exist within this space under these conditions. I think there are also some drawbacks that you have to meet. You have to meet the challenge of trying to see how that affects your company long term, because culture is a big part of every company, and that's hard to establish on Zoom calls, no matter what type of Zoom call you have.
No, that's important, Maurice, that companies establishing that company culture. So you guys are hitting on all of these big terms. So Arzu, you wanted to hop in for a minute. So yeah, what is your perspective on the way that this has impacted either remote work or any of these topics?
No, I mean, I would be redundant. I think that I never really honestly believed in work-life balance. I've never really felt that there has been such a thing.
Sure.
However, I think what has happened during the pandemic is that the expectation is set across the board where there is no such thing as work-life balance. When someone slacks you, they expect an immediate answer, just not because they're being malicious or anything, but it's just become normalized. And the way I look at it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to have bring up a point that is somewhat different than what Maurice said about building a culture in Zoom. So my company got launched during Zoom, right? I honestly have never, I've met one member of my team in person, but everyone else has been remote. And it's interesting, as I've been thinking about this, we do have a culture. We have a culture. We have a team. We have a culture. We have ethos, and it's not those things that you put on the wall. It's the way we operate and way we interact with one another and treat one another and our customers, without really, without a pamphlet given out. We all feel it. And so somehow it happened for us. Culture on Zoom.
Yeah. So would you say it's kind of the company culture piece? Would you say it's kind of like parenting, right? There are a whole bunch of different parenting books out there. There are a whole bunch of books, but there's no one way to do this well as you're developing this remote culture for your company.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I hadn't thought about that, Zanetta, but you're right. And I think as a parent, every single day I find myself unequipped, and I tell myself, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to do my best. And then somehow that works. And I think you're right. It's been like that.
Yeah. Okay. So these are major topics that all startups face, right? Work-life balance, company culture, how to think about engaging in the ecosystem, growing your network, all of these things. And because this particular panel is really to talk about stories of you all as BIPOC founders, people of color, I'm just wondering, can you guys share how the pandemic affected you, and if it did in any way, as a person of color in your company? And Sharice, I'll start with you.
I don't think it affected me differently as a person of color. I think we were all in a very unique, very challenging space. I do think that being a person of color in the small business, in the startup ecosystem, is the stats show, the amount of time it takes to raise money, the amount of money that's raised. And what you look at when you are raising money is the amount of money that you get in, say, a pre-seed or seed round. I think of it as setting the trajectory of where the rocket can take off from. So if you raise a little bit of money, then you can always take off, and you can, but the trajectory at which you can accelerate is different. And there's a part of me that didn't want to really acknowledge or believe that when I began fundraising. And as I've spent more time and talked to more founders and done more research, we know that this is like Newton's law right now, and we are working to fix that. And all I'll say at the end of that is, I think it's really important. One of my, I'm one of those people that writes down their goals. And one of my goals is to not only have a successful exit for this company, not only to, give a return to our investors and make a product that people love and want to use, but also to be in a personal situation where I can be an angel investor, kind of at my next stage of career. And I think that's one of the additional ways that we can make a difference.
I appreciate that. What about you, Maurice? You are a co-founder. You're the co-founder. You're a person of color, and your co-founders are not. Have you faced any challenges as a BIPOC founder during the pandemic?
Yeah, so I would echo Sharice when it comes to my stage and my background. Last year when we launched, we did a seed round of funding at the end of 2020 into 2021. And I would say, that was a super challenging standpoint when it came to accessing information. How do you get in front of the right capital for this time, right? Capital was a little bit wonky last year and still into this year, especially for startup companies. How do you get into that, the right circles, get the right information, get the right resources? And I would say that was a challenging part of being a founder in this setting. But once I was able to get that information through probably different strategies, I was able to be very successful on a seed round of funding, where we closed that. We opened that round in December of last year and closed that at the end of February, and raised almost $900,000 for our seed round. And we were pre-revenue, pre-product, pre-everything, pre-MVP. And getting that information was really, I would say, the biggest hurdle, just access to information. And I think that changes and has the capacity to change and be affected as a minority founder. But over time, once you get that information, it's kind of an even playing field at that point, and you're able to go and try to make the things happen that you can do.
Yeah, so I know I've congratulated you already, but in public, congratulations for that round, that raise. And, something that you're talking about here, Tammy Dorr at the top of Denver Startup Week today mentioned that Colorado has already raised $2.1 billion in investment in startups this year alone. And we've already surpassed what the raise was last year. And I'm just curious hearing about, the amount of money that you were able to raise in particular. Maurice, do you think that it would have been different for you? How do you think it would have been different if the pandemic had not hit? Do you think, you're talking about this access to information, how would you have accessed information differently?
Well, the process of raising capital is still people driven. It's still relationship based, no matter what. So, if there was not a pandemic, I probably would have just had access to more people, access to more information through more people, versus having to rely on more online sources or more warm welcomes that were via email and just not in person. So I think it made it more challenging from that perspective. But it's kind of a catch-22. I mean, I don't really know what I don't know, right? Like, if the pandemic didn't happen, I might not have left the job I was at, right? Yeah. So I think it's all in perspective that you place it, and overall, we just took it as it came and made the decisions from a point forward standpoint. And I think that's all we can really do. In hindsight, I think probably just access to more people from a person to person, more touch points would probably have made that more center in terms of how I was able to get in the right rooms with the right people.
Yeah, thank you for that. So Joe, I'm curious for you. You have been Mr. Colorado for a while. Everybody knows Joe Thurman. And as you went into moving from Java, as you mentioned, into this new venture, this new startup, was it more difficult to raise funds in the pandemic, or because of the network that you had established pre-pandemic, did it make it easier to send an email or to shoot a LinkedIn message? How did that work for you?
Yeah, well, you're too kind for one, but thank you for the kind words. I think so. Raising in the middle of the pandemic was interesting, right? But my previous company was bootstrapped, so I never raised outside of the pandemic. But I know a lot of people who have. The interesting thing is there's also, and like Cherise pointed to it, it's expensive to raise money, right? If it takes a lot of time, and without a pandemic, you have to jump on planes and fly around and do all the things, leave your team, not work on the product. So I think that there were some advantages to founders who maybe don't start with a $500,000 early pre-seed check to go proof concept to go do that. Like, it takes money to do that, right? And so I think that there were some interesting advantages to it. Also, a lot of disadvantages. And I won't just lean it on the pandemic. I mean, we have everything that happened from all the diversity side of things, George Floyd and everything else that led up to George Floyd, and people leaning into more BIPOC founders and that whole conversation. So, but to answer your question, I do think that the network within Colorado was extremely helpful. We raised $2.2 million for our seed round and closed that in April, and never met one of our investors in person before, for the entire round. But I definitely think the network and putting, 14 years into this market and the boards and being part of the Colorado Technology Association board and all that gave credibility to who we were. But it's so hard to raise money, and then it's so much harder when you show up different than someone else. And so I think that that's still the case. I don't think that has dramatically changed. If I'm honest, I don't think that that's dramatically changed in the market as of yet.
Sure. And, you touched on this in terms of the summer of 2020 and what happened with George Floyd for you in particular. And I'm just curious your thoughts on how that did impact investment for you, not even taking it broader, but for you as a Black man here in Colorado. What do you think that changed perspectives for you? Do you think that opened some doors or made introductions more likely?
There's some great investors here in Colorado, and I got a chance to know a lot of them when they wanted to lean in and do more. Myself and one of our co-founders, UB, as you know, we had a training company that we would do. It's called Breaking the Bias. So we did unconscious bias training. We helped train a lot of investors like Brad Feld and some others on ways that that bias might show up. So definitely just situationally, had some access to different people through building a relationship when I wasn't asking them for money. But that highlights one of the other problems that we have, right? I didn't have that opportunity to build a relationship with them unless I was asking for money, if that hadn't occurred. So it's all about the circles that people run in. And so it's very incestuous. And if you can meet someone passively 2 years earlier and build a relationship, and most of the people building those relationships don't look like the people on this call, that's when it's a lot easier to send a text and say, hey, I'm doing this fundraise. I have a lead investor and I need another 250 to close it out. What 3 people can you introduce me to? And so just the pre-existing relationship made it so much easier for me, but not a lot of people who look like me have pre-existing relationships and are in positions to build those. And so when you're just calling out to try to raise money, and I'll be short with the rest of this, investment is all about risk management. And so if you look at someone who you don't naturally see as someone who you trust and who creates returns, right? And the data is not out there for women of color, for people of color to show the returns that they've created because they never got the funding to actually create those returns. So when you see people who look like us, we don't look like the cookie cutter person who would give you the returns on investment. So in their brain, subconsciously, it takes an extra step. And investing is always risky. And so if you don't have any pre-existing relationship and you just meet me, I can have the greatest idea. But that last little 1% of yes, we want to invest. Yes, we want to be your lead investor. Yes, we want to write a check. People underestimate how much unconscious bias stops that 1% from being that yes. And that's all the difference between you getting funded and not getting funded.
These are gems, Joe. You, Maurice, and Sharice just dropped some major gems. I hope the audience is picking up on those. Thank you for that. So Arzu, your situation is different. You know, as a woman coming out of corporate America, you too have built relationships here in Colorado for a long time. Did that work to your advantage in raising as you talk to investors and people who would put you in touch with investors during this pandemic?
Yeah, great question. I actually, I built my network, you know, as Joe was saying, I started building my network 4 or 5 years ago when you and I met for the first time.
Yeah.
And so I was lucky. And at that time, it was all about network building and there was no fundraising objective. So when it was time to ask for money, which I am right now in the middle of, it's a lot easier to get the intros and it's a lot easier to have a meeting. That said, this is a very interesting, and Sharice, maybe you encountered this as well. You know, as a 20-some year corporate career executive, I have lots of relationships in the corporate world. I know a lot of very wealthy people in the corporate world. They know me. I make them look good while, you know, we work together. And not one of them has stepped in. So the funding is actually the meetings and the progress that I've made has all been the relationships I've built outside of corporate, which is very interesting for me. I don't know, Sharice, if you encountered the same thing.
Yeah, I think it just naturally, like the corporate environment and the entrepreneurial environment, the intersection isn't that large. The Venn diagram doesn't overlap that much. And so in terms of, we sell a lot to large enterprise customers. And I think, and I was there, so I understand there is a different mindset, a different threshold for risk, a different, just a little bit of a different lens that you look through when you're working for a really large organization, from both what products you're willing to try, what investments you're willing to make, and who you're going to bet on. And I think that's a bit of a cultural divide between those that want to move fast and take risks, and those that are rewarded for being a little bit more conservative.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Sharice, because I think that's also something to consider. So I'm thinking of if there are other BIPOC founders that are a little bit earlier in the stage than what you all are. And listening to this particular panel, there are gems that are being dropped. And for those that are coming out of a corporate environment where they've spent some time and maybe focus solely there, because that was my story a bit, that I spent a lot of time in the corporate world focusing on the relationships and just the work that I was doing there. And then coming out of that, thinking, oh, now I need to network, not because I'm trying to raise money, but just because that world was over here and now I'm outside of it. And there's a whole other world to engage in. And I'm just wondering, what would you all tell your pre-pandemic or early stage, like right at the beginning when you were starting your company, what would you have told yourself as it relates to networking and that vision of how do you make connections? Would you have done it differently?
I can start off with that one. I would tell myself, be creative. You know, like be the most creative. Try to come up with different ways of getting funding. For me, that's what the that was our fuel and probably biggest hurdle to overcome. And I actually ended up going the crowdfunding route instead of the VC route. Spoke to a lot of VCs, got to a lot of final rounds with partners. And ultimately, it ended up being a really creative way for us to approach doing our seed round through leveraging the social media and network that we already had. And that was very successful for us. And I would just say continue down that route to get there quicker.
That's great. Thank you. Anyone else? What would you tell your pre-pandemic self about networking?
So I can jump in here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what was the most impactful for me personally and for growing my business was just being honest and sharing my story. And I think everyone has their own challenges during their pandemic, whether it's relationships or health. And, you know, I run a storytelling consulting business, but also just sharing my own story was really hopeful for me, and it helped me make genuine connections with people. And I think I approached all my interactions not, you know, hey, hire me. I'd love to take you on as a client, but it was more of a personal connection. How are you doing? What are you looking to do? How can I help you? Or how can I point you to someone who I think can help you? And I think just being that genuine, building genuine trust and honesty has just been fundamental for me. And I've made great friendships throughout this whole weird time, which I'm really grateful for.
Absolutely. I'm thankful that I get to benefit from that. Joe, back over to you. What would you tell your pre-pandemic self? I mean, like I said already, you were Mr. Networker already. You were engaged and involved in the community. Is there anything that you would have done differently?
So no, I wouldn't say there's anything that I would do differently there. But what I would say is I just truly believe that the strongest relationships. Sorry, work from home, fire truck, go black. Mute really quick.
That's okay.
I think we're good. The strongest relationships are non-transactional, right? Transactional relationships are the weakest link in your network. And so I think sometimes transactional relationships come from, you know, networking events or something that you go to, but finding those opportunities to really be on a board and support something or a nonprofit that you really, really care about, while also being extremely strategic in those decisions. I think that that's important. And I think that, you know, to the points that have been made, those turn into real genuine relationships. And those are the people who will really lean in and who will help you when you are, whether you're trying to raise money or whether you're looking for an advisor or anything like that. So I would just say find more opportunities to always keep that space of, you know, 1% where you're 2%, whatever it is, where you're giving back. And then the other thing is mentors. I'm just a huge believer in that. So whether you need it in the moment or not, dedicate some time all the time to just asking. And you don't even have to know the person. I personally have continuously been surprised by people's willingness when you simply just ask them to lean in. And these are people who you don't even know. But back to that non-transactional relationship where you're genuinely asking for support and they're genuinely interested in giving it to someone who's maybe a little bit further back on the road of life than they are, or journey.
Yeah.
Find creative ways to build relationships that are non-transactional. I guess that'd be my point.
Yeah, no, that's good. And this morning, Brian from Ibotta mentioned at the startup session, at the beginning morning session, that he feels that, and I think Dan Caruso also mentioned that Colorado has such a good ecosystem for people who want to reach out and connect, and that we've built that here into the fabric of how we operate in Colorado. And, you know, I think that is true. I think there's a lot of work to be done to make it more inclusive as well. And you mentioned a number, you said 2%. And I thought you were going to this point, but I'll bring it up. The best we can tell at this point is we have launched over 1,000 startups since Denver Startup Week happened. Over 1,000 startups have launched in Colorado and Denver. And best we can tell, of the tech startups, there's about 2% that are people of color. And so we're working to change that. So my final question to each of you as panelists, what would you want Colorado's ecosystem to know about companies like yours so that those coming after you have it a little bit better, have a more inclusive opportunity? What would you want to tell the world? What would you want to tell a Colorado ecosystem about companies like yours? And Joe, since you were the very last person to talk, I'm going to turn it to you and then just kind of go around the table.
Wow, that's a big question for Colorado. I think Colorado needs to, we have to challenge ourselves to lead out and think differently than others have. You know, we do have an opportunity with people moving here, but there's also a lot of people who move away, BIPOC leaders, because they don't feel like they belong. They don't see themselves at a lot of the events that are focused on, you know, launching successful startups. So I think, you know, Zanetta, you're doing great work in the space of helping to put together groups of BIPOC founders that can learn and build together. But there have to be groups that are aggressively leaning in to support that effort, because the groups that are not part of the BIPOC leader groups are the ones that have all the access to the funding and all the relationships to the people that the BIPOC founders would love to connect with. So it's all about the community coming together. I'm going to lean into my last point in a non-transactional way. Find common ground. We are founders. We are people who have great ideas. And we have to find, I don't know, I'll use the word belonging because a lot of people talk about it. I hate to use it because it's vague in this context, but we have to create more of a sense of belonging for people who show up differently here in Colorado. It's not the most diverse place on the planet, naturally. And so we need to be conscious of our weaknesses. Our strengths are networking. Our weaknesses that there are not a lot of people naturally that show up diverse. So when we see it, we need to make them feel like they belong. It's kind of a soft answer, but
no, it was a great answer. Thank you. Arzu, how about you? What do you want the world to know? You know, this is being broadcast and recorded on YouTube. People will come and watch it the rest of the week and beyond. What do you want them to know about companies like yours?
I'll be much less polished than Joe, because this one is a sore point.
Go for it.
I wasn't really pitching. I was talking to someone, you know, showing my pitch deck and about my fundraising goal and how I was going to distribute the funds. And she asked me, why are you paying the people so much? And my answer was, because the people that I want to hire are not cheap. They have, you know, they've made a life that they're not college grads that, you know, can live on, you know, ramen noodle for a month. And her point was, well, you're competing with organizations and companies that have those college grads. And, you know, from an investor perspective, it's much less risky to go and fund these folks versus funding you. And so for me, it hits less about my identity as a BIPOC founder, but more towards my age, right? For people that are past a life stage where we've had successful careers, or this is chapter 2. The studies show that actually those businesses are pretty successful. Businesses that have been founded by women over 50 are actually extremely successful. And so what I want the world to know is for them to recognize that fact and not try to box us in the, 22-year-old Stanford graduate that just looks nothing like me.
Yeah.
It does not mean that we cannot be even more successful.
Yeah. Remove the boxes. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Kanita, over to you.
Yeah. So for my business, I'm focused on supporting BIPOC-owned and women-owned businesses, and that's something I'm really passionate about. And I think what Joe had mentioned really connects with me, that inclusivity is important and representation is important. So when we are building Colorado, when we're building it back better, I would love to see events. How can we actually build events that I want to go to, that I want to show up at? How can we build connections with others within this community that are truly for everyone? I think these are important questions and strategic actions that people should take to truly build an ecosystem and a state that we all want to be a part of and to grow together.
Excellent. Thank you. Belonging and inclusivity. There we go. Maurice, over to you.
Yeah, I see it as, a little bit different perspective. I think it's an opportunity, not just for Colorado, but to be a center for information, right? When you think about information and access to it, we just typically don't have access to the right information. I read a book that was Mastering the VC Game by Jeff Busgang. And it gave so much information that most MBA students would have, and we just didn't have access to it, right? So from my perspective, I would more so want to see Colorado look like the center for being a wealth of information for people like us. And that would attract people from all over, not just Colorado,
Yeah.
right? Like that's the big difference. Being able, there are places all over the US that try to cater towards BIPOCs, founders. But, what can make us different, I think, is giving information in a way that's digestible, that's instructional, that is inspirational, right? That's not just panels, it's not just mixers, is being able to be all inclusive. How do you start that conversation and also build in the investment part, which I believe Sunita is also going to be looking at, right? Like, how do you make it all inclusive and really walk a founder to success from that standpoint? I think that will make us unique in that measure. And I think it's a real opportunity that we have in Colorado to make that happen, because I do think that once we have the information, we can actually perform very well. I think it's a lack of information, even when it comes to capital, right? Like it's even before having a lack of access to capital, is informational based. So I think with bridging that gap will give everyone here a really good opportunity to push forward, and we can lead in that manner. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, isn't that the goal for us to make Colorado a better gym, right, for everybody and become that center of excellence? So Charisse, I'm going to let you have the last point here related to this question on what you want people to know about companies like yours. And then we do have a question in the chat.
Sure. There's two things that came to mind. The first is people often ask, how can I help? And my first answer is dollars are what really talk. So if you want to help a company that's starting, being an early adopter, trying out that product, giving feedback, actually paying for the service is the best way to help a business, because we're all here at the end of the day to provide services in exchange for revenue. And so sometimes I laugh when people say, well, what can I do? And it's like, well, you can use the product and become a customer. Would be like asking a restaurateur, what would you like me to do? I'd like you to come to our restaurant and bring your friends and have a meal. And the other thing is just recognizing that there are different stages of companies. And I think if you do too much pattern matching, you can miss out on opportunities for some fantastic companies, fantastic founders. I remember one investor said, you should pay for a deck designer. I'm like, that is good feedback. And there's also, maybe cost or resource reasons why I don't have a deck designer compared to the companies that you're seeing in the Valley. So just understanding, not letting something like the deck design be the reason that you don't hear the value and the opportunity within a particular company. And we did end up getting deck designer, just by the way.
And
so we did take feedback.
And you have a great deck and a great pitch. So we appreciate that so much. We have 1 minute remaining, and we did have 2 questions here in the chat that I did want to call out. One of them is about remote first software companies have seen improvements in the way companies are run. What I've seen in the last year with remote workforce, it's been extremely difficult to build relationships, empathy, and teamwork mentality in the software development lifecycle. How have your teams worked to improve these relationships? And I'm going to turn that to you, Cherise, to answer, because you were the one who brought up remote work first.
I don't think it was that challenging in our particular environment. We are a software company as opposed to a hardware company. And so we just picked some very shrewd tools for how we communicate and how we stay in touch every day. And we added one more stand up to our mix. So for us, it worked very well. And it was a pretty easy transition. So what we also started before the pandemic, we were a team together that went remote. We didn't start as a remote team. So I can't really speak to that difference. And I know we have a question from someone at Regis too, so I want to make sure we have time for that.
Yes, and I am responding to that directly right now. That Ken, thank you for your question about Regis, and I've sent you my email address so that we can follow up on that. Panelists, thank you so much for such a great conversation. This was really helpful, I think, for a lot of people to understand how BIPOC founders are thinking, the brilliance that you guys have brought to your companies and the raising that you're doing, and the incredible software and technology that you're bringing to the market. So thank you for saying yes when I asked each of you and for making the time to share this information. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.